Austin Lee Edwards was 28 years old, and he was once a Virginia state trooper, for 9 months anyway, and then he resigned and went to work for the Washington County Sheriff in Virginia, where he worked for about 2 weeks before he died. Yeah, they should not have hired him either. 8 years before, when Edward was 20, he was grooming a young girl, then just 13 years old, that he met online. That went on for about 2 years when she tried to break things off with him and he cut himself, showing her on video that he'd done that. His father was trying to get into the bathroom when the call ended. The police wouldn't know about that. The girl kept it to herself for many years. But what they would know about, at least what the Virginia state troopers knew about, was that Edwards spent a few days in a mental health facility as a result of cutting himself and being violent with his father. Reports say he disclosed that. They demanded a mental health assessment, which Edwards failed, and they hired him anyway. They also hired him despite a 2016 court order that required that Edwards not purchase or possess any firearms. He resigned, and when Washington County called his references, including the Virginia State Police, they expressed no concerns. None at all. Washington County also failed to find that court order and hired him, gave him a badge, and gave him a gun. And the entire time he was grooming another young girl, 15-year-old girl. We're going to call her Ruth, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because strength. The girl lived all the way in Riverside, California, 2,500 miles away. He was catfishing her, pretending to be a 17-year-old boy. He was also extorting her, and when she eventually stopped answering any of his messages, this mentally imbalanced child predator would buy a little house in Virginia and black out all the windows. Then he would get into his red Kia Soul and drive all that way to Riverside. It took him just about 3 days. Ruth lived a good life out there on the West Coast. She lived with her younger sister, her mom, Brooke Wynick, who was 38, and her grandparents, Mark, 69, and Sherry, 65, in a 2-story little house in a nice neighborhood. By all accounts, it was a loving, close family, the kind of neighborhood where the neighbors are paying attention. One of them would see an unfamiliar red Kia parked in her driveway and called police. When she noticed that there was a girl in the car who seemed to mouth the words, "Help me," she called 911 and asked for a welfare check. Another neighbor called in a fire a little later, just a few doors down from where the welfare check came in. That morning around 6:58 a.m., Edwards visited Ruth's home. He was walking back and forth from the house to his car twice before he drove away. When he came back around 9 a.m. or so, this time he approached the door. He knocked, flashed his badge and his weapon at Mark and Cherie. He said he was a detective and he had to interview Ruth. But Ruth wasn't home. She was out with her sister and her mother. Edwards calls and asks her to bring the girls home, make sure she has their cell phones, and leave Ruth in the car so that she could be interviewed separately. To try to avoid the youngest daughter being interviewed by the detective, they suggest dropping her off with her aunt nearby. Little would they understand, while they were trying to cooperate with what they believed was a legitimate request by a law enforcement officer, that they saved that youngest girl's life. The aunt, Michelle Blandon, was on the phone with her mother for most of this, but hung up after speaking with Edwards, who reassured her that everything was okay. During that phone call, though, Cherie would tell Michelle that Edwards had pictures of the inside of her house. She seemed nervous about the officer being there and was doing her best to comply. Edwards asked to see Ruth's room when the call ended. There are very little details about what happened next, but they aren't necessary to understand that an absolute horror unfolded. Edwards killed Brooke. He killed Mark and Sherry. At some point while he was doing that, Ruth came into the house and saw what he had done. He lit the house on fire and then forced Ruth at gunpoint into his Kia. The neighbor saw her mouth the words, "Help me." Police would arrive too late to intercept the Kia at the house, but the observant neighbor got the details. Cameras would get the details. Firefighters got to the burning house first, though, and discovered the family. It didn't take long at all for police to realize that the teenage girl who was the subject of the request for the welfare check lived in that house. Police would get Ebola out to all surrounding areas, other agencies, very quickly. Michelle is trying to call her mother back during all of that, but to no avail. Within a few hours, that Kia is picked up by a police helicopter. They lead ground units to the car that is traveling through an area called Kelso in San Bernardino County. Edwards had no plan for that. He just begins shooting at pursuing police vehicles. He drives off road and leaves the car. Ruth escapes the car and runs to her rescuers, thankfully. In the shootout, Edwards shoots at the helicopter before taking himself out. It's over, but it's not really. It's over for a cowardly child predator whose plans were surely horrific given the horror that he'd already inflicted. The governor of Virginia ordered an investigation into Edwards' hiring. The report came back that the background investigator failed to check the correct database and missed the court order. On the part of Virginia State Police, well, they changed their hiring policies after the utter failure in hiring Edwards. And in the meantime, the family has filed a $100 million lawsuit against Washington County, who gave him a badge and a gun, and against Edwards' estate. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.